The message that shook Boston. Nobody expected a simple youth basketball speech to ignite one of the biggest NBA controversies of the offseason. But within minutes of Jayson Tatum stepping in front of a group of young players and talking about leadership, humility, and the danger of believing you're the smartest person in the room, NBA fans began connecting the dots. The words sounded too specific. The timing felt too perfect. And before the day was over, social media had reached one conclusion. This wasn't just a motivational lesson. It might have been a message aimed directly at Jaylen Brown. Then something even more interesting happened. Jaylen Brown didn't ignore the conversation. He didn't laugh at all. He didn't call a press conference. Instead, he responded in a way that instantly convinced millions of fans he had heard exactly what everyone else had heard. Suddenly, what had once been viewed as one of the NBA's strongest superstar partnerships had transformed into one of the league's most fascinating storylines. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. This isn't really about one speech. It isn't even about one offseason. It's about nearly a decade of shared success, championship celebration, growing expectations, locker room dynamic, and subtle moments that most fans never noticed until everything finally unraveled. For years, Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown represented the future of the Boston Celtics. Together, they became all-stars. Together, they carried one of basketball's most iconic franchises through deep playoff runs. Together, they silenced critics who repeatedly questioned whether two elite wings could ever win a championship as teammates. Eventually, they did exactly that. Winning the NBA title should have guaranteed years of dominance. Instead, it became the beginning of the end. Behind the scenes, different leadership style, growing personality, and mounting pressure slowly created distance between two players who once appeared inseparable. Then came an unforgettable playoff collapse, shocking front office decisions, and a blockbuster trade that officially closed one of Boston's greatest eras. Now, every interview, every social media interaction, and every public comment between these former teammates is being examined under a microscope. Was Tatum really sending a subtle shot? Did Brown intentionally fire one right back? Or is the basketball world simply reading too much into every word because the breakup of this partnership still feels impossible to accept? By the end of this story, you'll see why this controversy goes far beyond one speech and why the next meeting between these two stars could become one of the most anticipated games of the entire NBA season. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from in the world. If you believe Tatum's speech was just leadership advice, if you think it was absolutely directed at Jaylen Brown, and if you enjoy in-depth NBA stories that uncover the drama behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. The partnership that once looked unbreakable long before the rumors, the coded messages, and the tension that now follows every public appearance. Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown were viewed as the foundation of Boston's future. They arrived only 1 year apart, both carrying enormous expectations, and almost immediately gave the Celtics something every franchise spends years trying to find: two young stars who could score, defend, switch across positions, and survive the pressure of playoff basketball. At first, the pairing felt almost too perfect. Brown brought aggression, physicality, and a willingness to attack the game with force. Tatum brought patience, polished shot making, and the quiet confidence of a player who seemed built for the biggest moments. Their personalities were different, but on the floor, those differences often worked. One pushed the pace, the other controlled it. One played with visible fire, the other appeared calm, even when the entire building was shaking. Together, they kept taking Boston deeper. There were conference finals appearances, painful eliminations, questions about whether they could coexist, and endless television debates suggesting the Celtics might eventually need to choose between them. Every time the criticism grew louder, Tatum and Brown answered by winning more games. Then came the championship. Boston finally broke through, and Brown's Finals MVP victory added another layer to the partnership publicly. The moment was celebrated. Tatum supported his teammate. Brown lifted the trophy, and Celtics fans believed the debate had finally ended. But championships do not erase every private tension. Sometimes they hide it. For years, both players had been asked who the real leader was, who should take the final shot, who deserved more credit, and which star mattered more to Boston's success. Even when neither player publicly embraced those questions, the comparisons never stopped. Every award became evidence. Every bad game became a referendum. Every great performance by one player seemed to create a new conversation about the other. That constant pressure can slowly reshape a partnership. What begins as healthy competition can become silent comparison. What begins as shared ambition can become two individuals trying to define their own place inside the same legacy. The Celtics kept winning, but beneath the success, the balance was becoming harder to maintain, the collapse that changed everything. The partnership might have survived the tension if Boston had continued winning. Success has a way of convincing everyone that the structure is still strong. But when the Celtics entered the postseason, carrying championship expectations, and then suffered one of the most painful collapses in franchise history, every hidden concern suddenly became impossible to ignore. Boston had control. They held a commanding 3-1 series lead against Philadelphia. The roster had enough experience, enough talent, and enough playoff history to finish the job. Around the league, the question was not whether the Celtics would advance. It was how quickly they would close the series and begin preparing for the next round. Then the momentum shifted. Philadelphia stole one game. Then another. Suddenly, Boston's comfortable advantage became a Game 7 nightmare. The pressure intensified when Tatum, still fighting his way back from a serious injury, was ruled out. The Celtics entered the most important game of their season without the player who had been the center of their identity for years. That left Brown in the spotlight. This was the opportunity critics had always demanded. If Brown wanted to prove he could lead independently, this was the moment. If Boston's two-star system truly had another level, this was where the second star needed to carry the burden. But the Celtics fell short. The final score mattered, but the image of the collapse mattered even more. Boston had lost 3 consecutive games after standing 1 victory away from advancing. They had failed to close against the lower seed, and they had done it inside TD Garden, in front of a crowd that expected another championship run. The defeat created immediate consequences. Questions that once felt disrespectful now sounded reasonable. Had the roster reached its ceiling? Was the chemistry still strong? Had the partnership between Tatum and Brown become more complicated than the organization admitted? The front office could no longer hide behind past success. A championship had proven the duo could win together, but the collapse raised a different question. Could they continue winning together under even greater pressure? Inside Boston, patience was disappearing. Outside Boston, every team with trade assets began watching. The Celtics had reached the point where doing nothing could be just as dangerous as making a dramatic move, and once the organization began seriously evaluating its future, the era that once looked permanent was suddenly standing on unstable ground. The trade that ended an era. When the decision finally came, it did not feel like a normal transaction. It felt like the official end of a basketball marriage that had shaped nearly a decade of Celtics history. Jaylen Brown was traded to Philadelphia. The same team that had just eliminated Boston now became his new home. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Brown was not being sent across the conference to a rebuilding franchise. He was joining a direct rival with championship ambitions, a fan base that had recently celebrated Boston's collapse, and a roster designed to create immediate pressure on his former team. For Celtics fans, the news landed like a shockwave. Some understood the logic. Boston needed flexibility, clarity, and a new direction. The financial structure had become difficult to manage, and the front office could no longer pretend that the same formula would automatically produce the same results. Others saw the move as a betrayal of everything the organization had built. Brown had endured criticism, improved his game, won a championship, captured Finals MVP, and helped restore Boston's position among the NBA's elite. Trading him so soon after that success felt less like roster management and more like erasing part of the franchise's identity. But the most painful part was the finality. There would be no more debates about whether Tatum and Brown could win together, no more speculation about who should lead, no more effort to balance their personalities inside the same locker room. The answer had been made for them. Tatum remained in Boston as the unquestioned centerpiece. Brown began a new chapter in Philadelphia with a chance to redefine himself without being measured against his former teammate every night. Yet the separation did not create peace. Instead, it created a new kind of tension. Once the trade became official, reports began emerging about what the relationship had looked like behind the scenes. Insiders described two stars who had grown more distant over time. There was no single explosive argument, no dramatic confrontation, and no public moment that could be identified as the breaking point. That made the story more believable. Real partnerships rarely collapse in one instant. They weaken through small disagreements, different expectations, missed communication, and years of pressure that slowly turned professional distance into personal separation. By the time Brown left Boston, the trade may not have destroyed the relationship. It may have only revealed how far apart they had already become. The narrative that followed Brown. After the trade, Brown did not receive a clean beginning. He arrived in Philadelphia carrying a championship ring, a Finals MVP trophy, and the reputation of an elite two-way player. But he also carried a new narrative, one that had quickly become more powerful than any statistic. According to voices around the league, Brown had begun acting like the smartest person in every room. The criticism suggested he had become less willing to listen, less comfortable accepting advice, and more convinced that his perspective should control the conversation. Whether the description was fair did not seem to matter. Once a narrative enters the NBA media cycle, it becomes attached to everything. A confident interview becomes arrogance. A strong opinion becomes stubbornness. A quiet disagreement becomes evidence of locker room conflict. Brown had always been more outspoken than Tatum. He was comfortable discussing subjects beyond basketball, willing to challenge assumptions, and unafraid of appearing different from the traditional image of an NBA star. Those traits had once made him interesting. Now, they were being used to explain why the partnership supposedly failed. The conversation became especially damaging because it was framed as a leadership problem rather than a basketball problem. Nobody could seriously question Brown's talent. His scoring, defense, athleticism, and playoff resume were already established. The issue was presented as something harder to measure. Could teammates trust him? Could coaches reach him? Could he lead without making the room feel like it belonged only to him? Those questions followed Brown into Philadelphia before he had even played a meaningful game in his new uniform. For Brown, the situation created a difficult choice. If he responded emotionally, critics would say he had proven them right. If he stayed silent, the narrative could grow without resistance. If he explained himself at length, every sentence would be analyzed for more evidence. So he waited, and while Brown remained publicly controlled, the conversation around him became louder. Then Tatum appeared at his basketball camp and delivered a message about humility, learning, and the danger of surrounding yourself with people who believe they already know everything. The timing changed everything. The words might have been innocent, but in the middle of the Brown controversy, innocence was no longer the easiest interpretation. The speech that sounded too specific, Jayson Tatum never said Jaylen Brown's name. That detail became the strongest defense for anyone who believed the speech was being misunderstood. Tatum was speaking to young athletes. His message focused on growth, leadership, humility, and the importance of remaining open to people who can teach you something. On the surface, it was responsible advice. Great players do need to keep learning. Leaders do need to listen. Confidence can become dangerous when it convinces someone that every other voice in the room is unnecessary. But context changes, meaning for months, Brown had been criticized with almost identical language. Analysts had described him as someone who believed he was smarter than coaches, teammates, and executives. Then Tatum stood in front of a room and warned young players about exactly that kind of behavior. The connection was immediate. Fans replayed the clip. Podcasts broke down every sentence. Television hosts debated whether Tatum had delivered the perfect sneak diss. A message sharp enough for Brown to recognize, but vague enough for Tatum to deny. That uncertainty kept the story alive. A direct insult would have created one day of headlines. Ambiguity created weeks of debate. Supporters of Tatum argued that he had no reason to attack Brown. They pointed to his calm personality, his history of avoiding public conflict, and the fact that the advice itself was completely normal. Supporters of Brown saw something different. They noticed the timing, they noticed the wording, they noticed how closely the speech matched the criticism that had followed Brown out of Boston. The truth may have existed somewhere between both interpretations. Tatum could have been speaking honestly to young athletes while also understanding how his words would be received. Public figures learn how to communicate on multiple levels. They know when a message can sound universal while still reaching one particular person, and Brown was paying attention. At first, he did not respond with words. Instead, fans noticed subtle social media activity that appeared to support content defending him and questioning the way the trade had been reported. It was not an official statement. It was more effective than one. Brown was letting people know that he had seen the conversation, understood the implication, and had no intention of allowing others to define the entire story. The silence was ending. And when Brown finally spoke, his response would make the original speech sound even more personal. Brown's controlled response. Jaylen Brown could have attacked everyone. He could have named the reporters, challenged the Celtics, accused Tatum of hiding behind a youth camp speech, or turn the entire situation into open warfare, he chose a more dangerous strategy. He stayed calm. During a live stream appearance, Brown addressed the claim that he behaved like the smartest person in every room. He denied ever presenting himself that way and suggested that if others formed that impression, it reflected their interpretation rather than his intention. That alone would have been a reasonable defense. Then Brown added the line that changed the tone of the entire story. He said the bar for intelligence in professional sports was not particularly high. The comment landed immediately. Brown still did not mention Tatum. He did not mention Boston. He did not mention the trade, but nobody needed the names. The context had already been created by weeks of reporting and the viral speech at Tatum's camp. Brown's message sounded like a reversal of the criticism directed at him. Instead of apologizing for appearing intellectually confident, he questioned the environment. Judging that confidence, it was sharp without becoming reckless. That restraint made it more powerful. Brown did not raise his voice. He did not deliver a long emotional monologue. He offered one observation and allowed the audience to decide who it applied to. The reaction spread instantly. Fans who believed Tatum had taken the first shot now saw Brown's comment as the response. Those who thought the speech was innocent argued that Brown had exposed his own sensitivity by connecting it to himself. Either way, the conversation had become a two-sided exchange. The former teammates were now participating in a public conflict neither one officially acknowledged. That is what made the tension so compelling. There was no direct confrontation to settle the issue. Every statement remained open to interpretation. Every denial created another question. Every public appearance became an opportunity for fans to search for hidden meaning. Brown's response also revealed something important about his personality. He was not going to accept the version of events being written about him. He understood that his future in Philadelphia would be judged not only by wins and losses, but by whether he could defeat the story that followed him out of Boston. The new season had not started, yet Brown was already playing defense. This time, the opponent was not standing across the court. It was the narrative surrounding his name. Two different leaders. The real issue between Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown may never have been talent. Both were elite players, proven scorers, strong defenders, and champions. The difference was how they led. Tatum's leadership was quiet. He relied on consistency, preparation, and performance. He rarely tried to control public conversations because his authority came from what he delivered on the court. Brown was more outspoken. He challenged ideas, expressed strong opinions, and was willing to address subjects beyond basketball. That confidence made him powerful, but inside a high-pressure locker room, it could also create friction. Neither style was necessarily wrong. The problem was that two strong personalities were trying to shape the same team. For years, Boston attempted to balance them. Tatum was often treated as the franchise centerpiece, while Brown was expected to function as an equal partner. As both stars became more successful, that balance became harder to maintain. On-court chemistry does not always mean personal closeness. Tatum and Brown could understand each other as basketball players while slowly growing apart as leaders. Now they have separate opportunities. Tatum controls Boston without question. Brown can establish a new identity without constantly being compared to his former teammate. But with freedom comes pressure. Neither player can hide behind the partnership anymore. From this point forward, every victory and every failure will belong directly to them. When they meet again, when Boston and Philadelphia finally meet, the game will feel larger than basketball. Cameras will follow Tatum and Brown from warm-ups to the final buzzer. Every handshake, glance, celebration, and moment of silence will be analyzed. If they embrace, fans will question whether it was genuine. If they avoid each other, it will be treated as proof of tension. Every possession between them will become part of the story. Brown will be trying to prove Boston misunderstood him. Tatum will be trying to show the Celtics made the right decision by choosing him as the unquestioned franchise leader. That creates enormous pressure on both players. If Philadelphia advances further, Brown supporters will say he was never the problem. If Boston succeeds, the trade will be viewed as necessary. The comparison may be unfair, but NBA narratives are rarely fair. One game cannot explain nearly a decade of shared history. Still, their first matchup. As opponents will feel like a public verdict, for the first time, they will not be trying to solve the same problem. They will be standing in each other's way, and once the game begins, every rumor, speech, and social media reaction will be replaced by the one language both players understand completely: competition. The real lesson, the end of the Tatum-Brown partnership proves that winning does not always create harmony. A championship can confirm that two stars are capable of succeeding together, but it cannot erase every difference in personality, leadership, or ambition. Boston chose clarity by moving Brown. The Celtics placed the franchise completely in Tatum's hands. That decision may simplify the locker room, but it also increases the pressure on him to deliver without sharing responsibility. Philadelphia chose opportunity. Brown now has the chance to prove that his confidence can strengthen a team rather than divide it. The larger lesson goes beyond basketball. Strong relationships do not always end because one person is wrong. Sometimes two people lead differently, communicate differently, and eventually need separate environments to grow. Fans may never know whether Tatum's speech was aimed at Brown or whether Brown's response was directed at Tatum. Both players understand that open conflict would only damage what they built together. Their rivalry can remain intense without becoming hateful. Competition does not require disrespect. Tatum and Brown help each other become champions. No trade, rumor, or hidden message can erase that history. Now both men have the opportunity to move forward, build new legacies, and prove that the end of a partnership does not have to become the beginning of bitterness. Tell us where you are watching from. Comment 1 if you believe both stars will succeed. Or comment 2 if you think one of them will regret the breakup. Like the video. Share it with another NBA fan. And subscribe for more stories about the drama, strategy, and human side of basketball.